They said a 9-pup convergence hadn't happened in 300 years. Not because it was impossible. The old blood carried that possibility the way oceans carry storms, always present, always waiting for the right conditions. But because 9 required something rare. Not just strength in the bloodline, not just luck in the stars. 9 required 2 wolves who loved each other so completely that the universe decided, apparently, to make a point about it. Xander and Isolda were that kind of rare. The morning she discovered the pregnancy, he was already dressed for the road. She told him anyway, whispered it against his jaw with her hands pressed flat against his chest, feeling his heartbeat stutter and then accelerate into something that was not quite breathing and not quite laughing and was entirely him. He pressed his forehead to hers. He said child like it was a prayer. He said he would be back within the week. He rode north. He did not come back. And in the silence that followed, something moved into the space he left empty. Slowly, with the patience of someone who had planned every step, the pack was convinced that their pregnant queen was not carrying 9 heirs. She was carrying a lie. That the king was dead. That those 9 pups had no known father. Impossible, they said, that they could be the kings. For when he left, the pregnancy had barely begun, and only the 2 of them had known. That she needed to be expelled before the pups arrived and complicated everything further. The humiliation was public, calculated, in front of everyone. And she endured every second of it with her chin up and 9 lives pressing against her ribs from the inside. Because breaking was not an option when something that small depended entirely on her. What nobody in that hall knew was that less than a week away, a king who was supposed to be dead was riding hard through the dark with 300 wolves at his back. And that beneath the castle, something far older than any of them had just opened its eyes. If you love intense wolf stories with destiny and twists, go ahead and subscribe to the channel right now. So subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any chapters. And how about we get to know each other better? I'm Maggie Reed, the author of these stories. And you? Drop a comment below with your name and what city you're watching from. The torches in the Great Hall burned too bright, and the crowd was already chanting her name like a verdict. Adulteress. Not shouting, chanting. Low, rhythmic, 400 voices finding a single pulse the way a pack always did when it decided something together. Isolda had grown up understanding that sound. She had stood at solstice ceremonies and felt that collective breath move through her chest like a second heartbeat, warm and belonging and hers. It did not feel like hers anymore. She stood at the center of the great hall of Ashvale, alone, the enormous curve of her belly preceding her like evidence, her silver ceremonial gown straining at every seam, and she kept her eyes fixed on the 5 elders at the stone dais ahead and did not look at the crowd. Because the moment she looked at the crowd, she would start counting faces she recognized. Wolves she had fed at harvest feasts. Wolves whose cubs she had held at naming ceremonies. Wolves who were now pressing forward against the iron railing of the upper gallery with their lips shaping a word that had nothing to do with who she was. Don't look. Eyes forward. Chin up. The charge, Elder Kraveth announced over the chanting, his voice filling every corner of the hall with the ease of a man who had rehearsed this exact moment, has been reviewed by the full council. The evidence has been weighed. There was no evidence. Isolda kept her face still. There was only absence and a lie told well enough, long enough to people who needed somewhere to put their grief. King Xander Ashvale departed 9 months ago and has not returned. Kraveth's gaze swept the gallery as he spoke, never settling on her, never quite meeting her eyes, as though looking at her directly might complicate the sentence he was building. In his absence, no heir was formally declared, no council witness, no record in the pack archives. The chanting swelled beneath his paws like something trained to do exactly that. And yet here stands our Luna, swollen with 9 lives that no wolf in this pack can verify. 9. The word moved through the gallery like a spark finding dry wood. Isolda felt them shift inside her. all 9 at once, a rolling wave of small, fierce movement that pressed outward against her ribs like a collective answer. We are here. We are real. We are his. She pressed her palm flat against the curve of her belly and breathed through it. Here was what the elders had chosen to forget. Shifter pregnancies did not betray themselves to the uninformed eye. The Ashvale bloodline, every great northern pack bloodline, ran beneath human skin. They appeared human in every visible way, lived among the wider world as human, and kept the old blood quiet and guarded, shared only within bonded pairs at the time of formal claiming. Their offspring were born looking like any other newborn. The shift did not come until the 2nd year, when the moon called the other nature forward for the first time. For centuries, the old blood had survived precisely because it knew how to stay invisible, which meant 9 wolf pups in her womb looked to any outside eye exactly like 9 human children. And Lord Evander had built an entire case on that visibility gap, with the patience of a man who had been waiting years for the right moment to use it. He stood to the right of the elder's dais, not seated with the council, never quite seated with the council, always positioned in that careful middle ground where he could claim authority or innocence, depending on which direction the room tilted. He was watching her now with the composed attention of someone observing the final move of a game that had taken a very long time to arrange. Isolda had spent 8 months in the confined east wing of this castle, trying to understand what she had done to make him her enemy. She had arrived at no satisfying answer, only the growing certainty that his reasons had nothing to do with her at all. That she was simply the most convenient piece on a board she hadn't known existed until she was already positioned on it. What Evander wanted, she still didn't know. What Evander feared, that she was beginning to understand, was the more useful question. And whatever it was, it apparently lived in the bloodline that Xander carried. 9, she thought again, feeling them move against her hand. Even among the old blood, 9 had not been born in 3 centuries. The elder's own record said so. She had found the references in the restricted archive during her 3rd month of confinement, in a text so old the edges crumbled when she turned the pages. 9 marks a return of the founding gift, the text had read. A convergence that the old blood produces once in an age, when the bloodline reaches its fullest expression. She hadn't understood it then. She was beginning to now. And she suspected Evander had understood it long before either of them. Isolda vos Ashvale. Kraveth rose to his feet, and the chanting dropped to silence so cleanly it felt like a held breath. By unanimous council decision, in the absence of our king, and in accordance with pack law regarding unverified lineage, I would like to speak. The voice came from the left side of the hall, not the gallery, not the dais, but the floor-level witness chairs, from a woman who had apparently decided that unanimous council decisions were exactly the kind of thing one interrupted if one had opinions about them. Bridgit Ashvale did not look her age. She never had. Shifters of old blood carried their years differently than humans. The decades settled in them like rings in ancient wood, present but not diminishing. And Bridgit wore hers with the particular energy of a woman who had survived enough to stop being impressed by things that were merely difficult. She rose from her witness chair with deliberate, unhurried purpose, and every wolf in the gallery went quiet, in the instinctive way packs went quiet when someone with genuine authority decided to use it. She was Xander's mother. She was Isolda's mother-in-law. And she was the only wolf in this hall who had sat beside Isolda every single day of the last 8 months, and never, not once, let the doubt touch her eyes. Bridgit, Kraveth began. Pack law grants a blood elder of the royal line the right to witness testimony before any ruling becomes final. Bridgit smiled at him. It was the smile of a woman who had read every line of pack law because she had suspected for 6 months she might need to. I am a blood elder of the royal line. I have testimony. If anyone would like to explain why that right doesn't apply today, I have the relevant passages memorized and considerably more patience than this proceeding appears to have budgeted for." Evander's folded hands tightened. A single, fractional shift. Isolda was the only one close enough to see it, and she filed it away. 2 minutes, Kraveth said, in the tone of a man making a concession he did not intend to honor past the technical requirement. More than enough. Bridgit turned to face the full hall, all 400 wolves, every gallery, the crowd that had been chanting 30 seconds ago. And she did it with the ease of a woman who had spent decades standing in rooms that did not want her and had made her peace with every one of them. "My daughter-in-law told my son she was pregnant the morning he left for the northern inspection. He kissed her. He told her to rest. He said he would be back within the week." She paused, letting the simplicity of it land. "He has not come back. My son is missing, and any wolf who calls him fallen in my presence will be having a very different kind of conversation with me directly afterward." Her gaze moved, briefly and deliberately, to Evander. It did not linger. "The pups she carries are Xander's. I know this because I know my son. I know this woman. And I know what a lie smells like when it has been marinated for 8 months by someone with a great deal to gain." A single beat. That was under 2 minutes. She sat back down. The hall held its silence the way stone holds cold. Completely, without effort. Then Kraveth drew breath to speak, and the far doors of the great hall opened first. Not both doors. One. A single pack guard stumbling through with the specific momentum of someone who had been running and had only barely remembered to stop before entering a formal proceeding. His face was pale. His uniform carried the dust of hard road miles, and the way he was looking at the dais had the quality of a man about to say something that would detonate the room and was taking one last breath before he did it. Scouts at the north border. He was still catching his breath. King Xander's colors. He's alive. A beat that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. He's an hour out, and he has... The guard stopped, looked at the floor, looked back up, needing the half-second to believe his own words. He has an army at his back. The chanting did not resume. 9 lives moved inside Isolda. Ramsay first, always Ramsay, then the others in a rolling cascade of small, fierce presence, pressing forward as though they could feel through her skin and through stone, and through 1 hour of distance the approach of someone they already recognized. "There," they said, in the language of blood and bone. "There he is. We told you he was coming." Bridgit reached sideways without looking and took Isolda's hand. "Sit down, sweetheart," she said quietly, in a tone built only for the two of them. "Your feet have been hurting for 6 weeks, and you are absolutely not meeting your husband standing on swollen ankles. Also, I intend to watch Evander's face for the next 60 minutes without interruption, and I need you calm and seated so I can give that my full attention." Despite everything, the chanting still ringing in her ears, the 8 months pressing down like accumulated stone, the 9 lives moving restlessly inside her, Isolda sat. And for the first time since dawn, she let herself breathe. The army arrived before Xander did. Isolda heard it first. A low vibration through the stone floor, the kind that started in the soles of the feet and climbed the spine before the ears caught up. Then the sound resolved itself into something unmistakable. Hooves. Hundreds of them, moving in the coordinated rhythm of trained wolves who had ridden hard and had not yet been told to stop. The great hall, which 60 seconds ago had been a carefully arranged stage for her expulsion, dissolved into chaos with the particular speed of a crowd that had been performing certainty and was now confronted with doubt. Wolves pushed toward the high windows. Guards exchanged looks across the chamber with the trapped energy of men whose orders had just become irrelevant. Elder Kraveth stood at his dais with both hands flat on the stone table, staring at the far doors as though willpower alone might control what came through them. Evander had not moved. That, more than anything, made Isolda watch him. A man surprised steps back, shifts his weight, reaches for something. A wall, a table, the nearest available anchor. Evander stood with his hands folded and his face composed, and his eyes doing a rapid, precise calculation that had nothing to do with surprise and everything to do with contingency. He knew, she thought. He didn't know when, but he knew this was possible. He prepared for it, which meant whatever came next, Evander already had a move waiting. Bridgit, seated beside her, had produced a small, wrapped sweet from somewhere inside her ceremonial sleeve, and was eating it with the unhurried composure of a woman watching a theatrical performance she had already seen and knew ended well. She caught Isolda's look and offered the second sweet from her other sleeve. "Fennel and honey," Bridgit said. "I brought them for you, actually. You always forget to eat when you're under significant emotional duress, which I find both understandable and counterproductive." She pressed it into Isolda's palm. "Eat. You're feeding 9. The revolution outside can wait 30 seconds. "That's not a revolution," Isolda said. "No," Bridgit agreed pleasantly. "That's my son. But the principle stands." The doors opened. Xander Ashvale walked into his great hall for the first time in 9 months and did not stop moving. He was road-worn and hollow-eyed, and he had clearly not slept in a number of days that his body was still tallying. But he moved through that hall the way a storm moved, not fast, but inevitable, the kind of forward momentum that did not ask permission from the space it occupied. 2 commanders flanked him. A dozen more warriors filed in behind, all of them in travel-worn Ashvale colors, all of them carrying the contained readiness of wolves who had fought their way home and were not done yet. He found her immediately. Not the dais, not Kraveth, not Evander, not the council that had spent 8 months running his pack in his name. Her. Isolda felt his gaze land like a hand pressed flat against her sternum. The specific weight of being seen by someone who had been looking for her across a very long distance. His eyes dropped to her belly. Something moved through his face. Fast, enormous, and then pulled inward with the practiced control of a man who had learned to feel things quietly or not survive them. But she had seen it, that one unguarded second. It was enough. "Xander Ashvale," Elder Kraveth said, and to his credit, his voice barely fractured. "This council is in active session. I can see that." Xander's gaze moved from Isolda to the dais with the deliberate shift of a wolf choosing a target. He stopped in the center of the hall, the same stone floor where Isolda had stood alone 40 minutes ago, and looked at the 5 elders with an expression that was entirely calm and somehow far more dangerous for it. "I can also see that my Luna is sitting in a witness chair rather than the queen's seat. My council is in session without my authorization, and someone has been leading 400 of my wolves in a chant. I am going to need someone to explain to me very carefully." A pause. Who wants to start? The silence had a texture. Isolda could feel it on her skin. "Your Majesty." Evander stepped forward from his position beside the dais. Smooth, unhurried, his voice calibrated to the specific frequency of reason in a room full of emotion. "We are relieved beyond words at your return. Beyond words." He pressed a hand briefly to his chest in a gesture of sincerity so well executed it almost looked real. "In your absence, we faced an impossible situation. Allegations arose, painful ones that none of us wished to pursue, regarding the Queen's—" "Allegations," Xander repeated. "Painful ones," Evander said again, gently, "brought forward by multiple pack members in good faith, regarding the lineage of the Lord Reese." Xander's voice did not rise. It did the opposite. Dropped, the way a temperature drops before a storm, quiet enough that the entire hall went still to hear it. "I was at the northern border when I received word my Luna had been brought before the council on a lineage charge. I rode for 6 days without stopping. I want you to consider, carefully, what that ride gave me 6 days to think about, and then I want you to choose your next sentence with that in mind. Evander chose it anyway. That was the thing about him, Isolda had learned. He always had the next sentence ready, and he delivered it before the room could finish processing the last one. Your Majesty, with the greatest respect, the Council acted within its legal authority. In the absence of a declaration of heir, Pack law also requires, Bridgit said from her seat beside Isolda without standing up, without raising her voice in the pleasant tone of someone making a casual conversational contribution, that any action against a Luna be preceded by a formal written notice to all blood elders of the royal line. I received no such notice. She looked at her son. Did you receive a notice, Xander? You are technically a blood elder of the royal line. I was somewhat difficult to reach, Xander said. You were, Bridgit agreed. Nevertheless, the paperwork requirement exists regardless of the difficulty of delivery. It's almost as though the law was designed to prevent councils from acting in haste. She tilted her head at Kraveth with serene interest. Fascinating oversight. Kraveth looked like a man whose careful structure was developing load-bearing cracks in real time. The blood elder notification is a procedural. It is a legal requirement, said one of the commanders who had entered with Xander, a broad-shouldered wolf named Brennan, who had apparently decided this was the moment to contribute. I checked on the ride-in. Your Majesty had questions about the legality of the proceedings. We had 6 days. He produced from inside his coat a folded document that had clearly been prepared on horseback and was slightly crumpled but entirely legible. There are 17 procedural violations in this morning's session alone. I stopped counting at 17 because we ran out of road. Evander's composure did not crack. Isolda watched it hold with the focused attention of someone who had spent 8 months studying exactly where his limits were. His eyes moved, quick, controlled, to 2 specific faces in the upper gallery. Wolves she didn't recognize. Wolves who received his look and gave the smallest possible nod in return. Still moving, she thought. Even now, he's still moving. She pressed her hand to her belly. Ramsay pushed back. One hard, deliberate kick, precisely placed. Not distress. Warning. I know, she told him silently. I see it too. My wife, Xander said. And the hall went quiet again at the word. The clean public weight of it, the declaration in it, will be returned to the Queen's chambers immediately. The council session is suspended pending a full procedural review. He looked at Kraveth. You will have the documentation for that review ready by morning. He looked at Evander. You and I will speak privately. Tonight. Evander inclined his head in a bow of perfect correctness. Of course, Your Majesty. I look forward to explaining the full context of the decisions made in your absence. I believe when you understand everything we faced, you will find that we acted only in the interest of... Tonight, Xander said. Just the one word. Evander stopped. 2 of the warriors moved to escort the elders from the dais. The crowd in the galleries was doing the complicated emotional work of a pack that had been certain about something 20 minutes ago and was now rapidly revising. Not with guilt, not yet, but with the specific discomfort of people who had been singing someone else's song and had just recognized the melody. Bridgit stood, helped Isolda to her feet with the practical efficiency of someone who had been doing useful things in difficult moments her entire life, and said at normal volume, to no one in particular, and therefore everyone within range, 17 procedural violations, on a single morning. I want that number carved somewhere, as a reminder. Mother, Xander said. I am simply noting, Bridgit said serenely, for the historical record. Xander crossed the hall to them. He moved differently up close. The controlled momentum was still there, but underneath it something else. Something held very carefully together that was not quite as steady as it looked from across a room. He stopped in front of Isolda, and for one moment neither of them spoke, because 9 months of silence and distance and fear had compressed into a space too small for whatever the first words should be. His hand moved to her belly, Not reaching, not asking, just resting, warm, present, 9 lives pressed back against his palm, all at once, with the specific energy of creatures greeting someone they had been waiting for. Something broke open in his face, quietly, completely. "I know," Isolda said before he could find words. "I'll explain everything, all of it." Her throat tightened. "But there are 9 of them. I need you to know that first." "9, he said. His voice was barely sound. "Ramsay kicks the hardest," Bridgit offered helpfully, from approximately 18 inches away, where she was making absolutely no effort to give them privacy. "The others have their individual qualities, which I have cataloged. I have been cataloging them for 8 months. I have opinions." She paused. "I can share them now or after you've had something to eat. I recommend after. You look like a man who has not had a proper meal since the border, and my opinions are best received on a full stomach." Xander looked at his mother, then at Isolda, then at the ceiling, briefly, with the expression of a man recalibrating his emotional capacity to include everything happening simultaneously. "There's also the matter," Brennan said from across the hall, consulting his crumpled document with professional focus, "of violations 4 through 9, which relate specifically to the composition of the council quorum and may render the entire morning's proceedings technically—" "Brennan," Xander said. "Later. Yes, understood." Brennan folded the document back into his coat. "I'll add it to the review file." Somewhere in the upper gallery, unnoticed in the general dissolution of the crowd, 2 wolves slipped out through a side passage, moving quickly, moving with purpose, moving in exactly the direction of the east corridor where, if someone had been paying close attention for 8 months, they would know a certain lord kept his private correspondence. Isolda saw them go. She said nothing. Not yet. But Ramsay kicked again, once precisely, with the focused insistence of someone marking a direction. "That one," he seemed to say. "Don't lose that one." She didn't intend to. The walk from the Great Hall to the Queen's chambers took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of Xander's arm around her waist, of Bridgit clearing the path with nothing but a look, of 9 lives pressing and shifting as though they too could feel that something was about to change. The Queen's chambers smelled like pine and candlelight, and 9 months of Bridgit Ashvale refusing to let the housekeeping staff remove Xander's things. His coat still hung by the door. His books were still stacked on the left side of the desk in the particular disorder that meant he had been reading 3 of them simultaneously and intended to return to all of them. Even his boots, the good ones, the ones he wore for formal occasions, sat beneath the window where he had left them the morning he rode north, positioned with the unconscious precision of someone who expected to need them again soon. Isolda had looked at those boots every single morning for 9 months. She had told herself, every single morning, that they were just boots. She had not believed herself once. "Sit," Xander said from behind her, in the tone of a man trying very hard to sound calm and not entirely succeeding. "I've been sitting for an hour. My back is carrying 9, he said. "Sit. You've been home for 40 minutes and you're already giving orders." "I've been giving orders for 9 months, he said. "Just not to anyone who mattered." She sat. Not because he told her to, because the look on his face when he said it made her legs decide the argument on their own. He crossed to her, crouched to her eye level the way he always had, the old habit of it so familiar it hit her somewhere behind the sternum, like a door opening onto a room she had locked. His hands found hers. His thumbs moved across her knuckles in slow, deliberate strokes, and she felt the tremor he was containing, small, controlled, present, in the tension of his grip. "Tell me what happened," he said. "All of it. From the beginning." She told him. She told him about the first weeks, the quiet ones, before her condition became visible, when she had believed the inspection would end any day and he would walk back through those doors, and she would tell him in private, the way they had imagined, with no audience and no politics, and no one else's opinion in the room. She told him about the 3rd month, when the whispers started. The fourth, when Evander requested his first private audience with Elder Kraveth. The sixth, when the East Wing lock appeared on the outside of her door, and Bridgit arrived the next morning with her personal belongings in a trunk, and the expression of a woman who had made a decision and was not interested in debating it. "She moved in," Isolda said. "Of course she did," Xander said. "She brought a soup pot, a very large one. She said it was for medicinal broths." A beat. "She has used it primarily to make excellent soup, and on one occasion to block a doorway when Kraveth's assistant came to deliver council paperwork she disagreed with." Something crossed Xander's face that was not quite a smile, and was the closest thing to one she had seen since he walked in. That sounds exactly like her. The contraction that arrived then was not a warning. It was a declaration. Isolda's breath left her in a sharp, controlled exhale, both hands going to her belly, and 9 lives surged in response, not in distress, but in the focused, purposeful way of creatures who had made a collective decision and were done waiting. "Now," Ramsay announced, with the absolute authority of someone who had been the most impatient of the 9 for approximately 7 months, "now is when we do this." "Xander," she said. He was already on his feet. "I'm here. Get Bridgit." He moved to the door, opened it, and found Bridgit standing approximately 4 inches on the other side of it, arms crossed, with the composed expression of a woman who had been listening through solid oak with no apology whatsoever and had already calculated the timeline. "I've been ready for 20 minutes, Bridgit said, stepping past her son into the room with a large bag that clinked with the organized efficiency of someone who had been preparing for exactly this moment since approximately month 7. "Move, you," she pointed at Xander, "are going to be present because she needs you, and because you have missed 9 months, and you do not get to miss this too. You are also going to be calm, quiet, and useful in that order. If you faint, I will be deeply unsympathetic." "I'm not going to faint," Xander said. "Everyone says that," Bridgit said pleasantly. What followed was not quiet. Isolda had read about shifter births in the old texts she'd borrowed from the restricted archive during her long months of confinement. The texts used words like swift and instinctive and guided by the old blood. What the texts had not adequately conveyed was that 9 simultaneous opinions about the order of arrival created a process that had more in common with a negotiation than a sequence. Ramsay came first. Of course he did. Small and dark and already attempting to move before he had fully arrived. A tiny gray-black shape that Bridgit caught with the practiced confidence of someone who had done this enough times to have a system, wrapping him in warmed cloth and placing him immediately against Isolda's side, where he went still in the specific way of a creature that has found exactly where it belongs. "Oh," Isolda said. "Just that." The word fell out of her without permission. "Don't look yet," Bridgit instructed. "There are 8 more coming and you need to stay focused. You can have feelings afterward. Feelings are scheduled for later." "You cannot schedule—" "I have scheduled them," Bridgit said firmly. "They are on the list, right after the 9th one arrives and before the soup." Xander, seated behind Isolda with her weight against his chest and both his arms around her, made a sound she felt more than heard. Low, involuntary. The sound of a man whose emotional architecture was being significantly restructured in real time. "You're supposed to be calm," she reminded him. "I am calm," he said. His voice was absolutely not calm. "That's very convincing. Thank you." They came one after another, not all at once, not in a rush, but with the steady, determined rhythm of creatures who had agreed on an order and were executing it with the patience of those who knew the ones ahead of them were already safe. Bridgit moved with fluid efficiency, her hands certain, her commentary continuous and inexplicably soothing, even when it was not technically relevant. "This one has an opinion about everything," she announced at the 3rd. "I can tell already. Look at that expression. That is the face of a wolf who will argue about the location of furniture." "They're newborns," Xander said. "Character reveals early," Bridgit said serenely. The fifth arrived with a fountain of warmth that made Isolda laugh. Actually laugh, broken and overwhelmed and completely genuine. And Xander's arms tightened around her and his forehead dropped to her hair, and he stayed there, breathing, for a long moment while Bridgit pretended not to notice because she was busy and absolutely not crying at all. "I'm not crying," Bridgit said, to no one in particular. "No one said you were," Isolda managed. "Good, because I'm not. I am experiencing a mild seasonal eye irritation." She settled the fifth one against the growing warmth of the group and reached for the sixth with steady hands. Very common this time of year. By the seventh, the room had taken on a quality that Isolda had no practical word for. A warmth that was not just temperature, a light that was not just candlelight. Something older, the same something she had felt in the texts, in the records, in the 9-pointed seal she had found pressed into the oldest pages of the restricted archive. The founding gift. The convergence that came once in an age, when the bloodline reached its fullest expression. It was filling the room like a held breath becoming a song. Xander felt it. She knew because his breathing changed. Slower, deeper, the involuntary recalibration of someone whose wolf had recognized something ancient and was paying attention with its entire self. "What is that?" he said quietly, not alarmed. Awed. "I think," Isolda said, equally quiet, "that's them." The eighth arrived in a rush of that same golden warmth, and the ninth, the smallest one, the one she had privately called Lark because she had always sensed this one last and softest, like a note held just beneath the others, came with the particular calm of someone who had known all along there was no rush, that the space was already made, that the world was already waiting. Bridgit placed Lark against the group and went completely still. 9 small wolves, 9 heartbeats. 9 presences breathing in the same rhythm, pressed together in a warmth that pulsed with soft gold light. Not imagined, not metaphor, but real, visible, filling the room from the center of the pile outward like sunrise arriving from the inside out. The 9-pointed seal, alive, finally answered. "Well," Bridgit said after a long moment, in a voice that was doing significant structural work to hold itself together. "That is not something I have seen before." A pause. "I am adding it to the list of things I was right about. The list is very long. I keep it alphabetized." Xander hadn't spoken. Isolda turned to look at him and found his face completely unguarded. All the control gone. All the careful architecture of a king who had held himself together through 9 months of captivity and 6 days of desperate riding simply dissolved. And underneath it, just a man looking at 9 small, glowing lives that were his, that had survived without him, that were here. "Hey," she said softly. He looked at her. His jaw worked once. "They waited for you," she said. Ramsay was impatient, but they waited. He pressed his forehead to hers. The old gesture, the one from their binding ceremony, the one that meant, "I see you, I am here, there is nowhere else." And she felt the tremor move through him all at once, the thing he had been holding the entire length of the hall and the 6 days of riding and the 9 months before that. She held it with him, that was all. Just held it. Until Bridgit said, at perfectly calibrated volume, "I am going to go get the soup now. It has been warming for 4 hours, and it is excellent, and I will not apologize for the timing." She gathered her bag with crisp efficiency and paused at the door. "Also, Brennan is in the hallway. He says violations 4 through 9 are urgent. I told him they could be urgent after soup." She opened the door. He agreed. He's having soup too. I made enough. She left. The door closed. The golden light pulsed once, warm, steady, complete. And somewhere in the east corridor, moving quickly and quietly through the passage that connected to the castle's oldest wing, 2 of Evander's wolves were doing something with a document that had not existed this morning. Ramsay opened his eyes, tiny, Ramsay gray, already sharp, and looked directly at the door. The soup was good. Isolda knew this because Bridgit told her it was good, then told her again, then watched her eat 3 spoonfuls with the focused attention of a woman ensuring that a medical directive was being followed. The 9 pups were settled in the lined cedar crib that had appeared in the room sometime during the last hour. Isolda had not seen anyone bring it, but with Bridgit involved, things tended to materialize without explanation. And the golden warmth that had filled the room at their birth had settled into something quieter now, still present, like embers after a fire that had said everything it needed to say. Xander sat on the edge of the bed with his elbows on his knees, his untouched soup cooling beside him, and told her what had happened to him. She had asked. He had started talking. And somewhere in the 3rd sentence, she had understood that whatever she had imagined during 9 months of silence, and she had imagined many things, some of them very dark, the truth was worse in ways she hadn't considered, and better in one way she hadn't dared to hope for. It wasn't an inspection, he said. There was no territorial issue at the north border. The report was fabricated. His jaw tightened. I knew something was wrong the moment we crossed into the Greyvale Pass. The scouts who were supposed to meet us weren't there. The relay posts had been emptied. Someone had cleared that road ahead of us very deliberately. A beat. We rode into an ambush at the second canyon. Isolda set down her spoon. 30 wolves, Xander continued. Not Asheville colors. No colors at all. Which told me more than colors would have. Professional, coordinated. The kind of operation that costs a great deal and leaves no documentation. His eyes moved to the window, to the dark outside it. We fought clear. Lost 2 men. The ones who survived with me, 11 of us. We couldn't come back. Not immediately. They had the roads watched. Every southern passage covered. He looked at her. Someone had prepared for the possibility that I survived the ambush. They had a containment plan ready. Evander, she said. Not a question. I couldn't prove it from the north. I needed to get closer. I needed witnesses, documentation, someone inside the pack who had seen enough to testify. A muscle moved in his jaw. It took 8 months to build a case strong enough that coming home meant something more than walking back into the same trap. 8 months. She had spent 8 months believing he might be dead, being told he was dead, being accused of everything that grew in the space his absence left. And he had spent those same 8 months 50 miles away, building an army specifically to come back for her. She picked her spoon back up, not because she was hungry, because if she didn't do something with her hands, she was going to say something that would make Bridget's soup go cold while everyone dealt with the emotional consequences. The army, she said carefully. Where did they come from? The Greyvale pack owes Asheville a debt 3 generations old. Something shifted in his expression, not pride, something more complicated. Their alpha honored it. 300 wolves, no questions asked. 6 days of riding. A pause. Commander Brennan spent 4 of those days drafting a 17-point legal challenge, which I initially considered excessive. And now? And now I think he may have saved us more cleanly than 300 wolves did. The door opened without a knock. Brennan filled the frame with the energy of a man who had been waiting for exactly the right moment and had calculated that this was it. He was holding the crumpled document from earlier, now uncrumpled, smoothed flat, annotated in 3 different inks in the margins. Behind him stood 2 Asheville guards and a woman Isolda didn't recognize, small, silver-haired, somewhere between 50 and ancient, wearing the plain brown robes of a pack archivist. Apologies for the hour, Brennan said, in a tone that did not sound apologetic. We have a problem. Xander stood. Show me. Brennan crossed the room and laid the document on the desk. It was a formal pack declaration. Heavy cream parchment, official seal, the elaborate heading of a council ruling. Isolda leaned forward to read the title and felt the blood drain from her face. Declaration of Disputed Lineage and Provisional Dissolution of Luna Status, Asheville Pack, Northern Territory, dated 3 days ago, signed by all 5 elders. This was filed in the Central Pack Registry this morning, Brennan said, before you arrived, before the session even began. He pointed to the bottom of the page where, beneath the 5 elder signatures, a 6th line waited, blank, formally labeled, Alpha King confirmation, required for enforcement within 30 days, 30 days. Evander had given himself 30 days to get Xander's signature, or to ensure Xander wasn't available to withhold it. He filed it before the session, Xander said. Very quiet, very still. He filed it before the session, Brennan confirmed, which means the session this morning wasn't a trial, it was theater. The decision was already made. He just needed witnesses to the reading so enforcement would hold. He paused. There's more. The archivist stepped forward. Her name, she said, was Petra, and she had worked in the Asheville Restricted Archive for 31 years, and had been waiting for an opportunity to share certain observations for approximately the last 8 months. She placed a second document beside the first. This one was old, not artificially aged, genuinely old. The parchment the particular amber of centuries. The ink faded to brown. A land grant. Isolda scanned it and found the name immediately. Reese, ancestral claim, Northern Corridor Territories, suspended pending Asheville Sovereignty Review, year of the Fourth Accord. Evander's family, Petra said, held the Northern Corridor Territories for 200 years before the Fourth Accord transferred them to Asheville sovereignty. The transfer was conditional, renewable each generation, provided the Asheville bloodline maintained direct royal succession. She looked at Isolda. Direct, uncontested, verified. The room went very quiet. 9 pups with the founding gift, Xander said slowly, would consolidate Asheville succession so completely that the Northern Corridor claim would never resurface. For another 300 years minimum, Petra said. The old texts are specific about the duration of a founding convergence's sovereignty protection. Evander has those same texts. He's had access to the restricted archive for 6 years. There it was. The shape of it, finally clear. Not hatred, not personal malice, not even ambition in the ordinary sense. Land. 200 years of his family's territory, lost to a legal condition, and 9 pups whose existence made that condition permanent. Evander hadn't tried to destroy Isolda because of who she was. He had tried to destroy her because of what her children meant. Ramsay, in the cedar crib across the room, made a sound. Small, sharp, nothing like distress. More like punctuation. So the document needs your signature to enforce, Isolda said to Xander. And you're not going to sign it. So it dies in 30 days. It would, Brennan said. Except... He turned to the 3rd page, which Isolda had not yet seen, and she looked at it and understood immediately why he had led with the other 2. Evander filed a secondary motion this morning. Separate registry, separate seal. He pointed to the heading. A formal challenge to the king's mental competency following extended captivity and combat trauma, requesting a 90-day council-supervised evaluation period before the king may exercise executive authority. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then Bridgit, who had been standing in the corner eating soup with the expression of someone taking very detailed mental notes, said, He's trying to freeze your authority for 90 days, during which the 30-day lineage declaration expires by default. The pup's status becomes legally unresolved, and he controls the council that controls the territory. She set down her bowl. Her voice had gone completely flat. Not angry, something colder and more deliberate than anger. He has been planning this specific sequence for years. The ambush, the absence, the declaration, the competency challenge. Each piece designed to activate if the previous one failed. She looked at her son. He never needed you dead, Xander. He just needed you gone long enough. He's not going to get 90 days, Xander said. No, Bridgit agreed. He is not. She picked up her soup again with the decisive energy of a woman who had just made a decision about something. Petra, how many original copies of the Fourth Accord land grant exist? Petra blinked. 3. 1 in the Central Registry, 1 in the Restricted Archive, and 1 in... She stopped. Everyone in the room arrived at the same place at the same time. The East Corridor, Isolda said. The private correspondence room. She was already on her feet. The 2 wolves I saw leaving the gallery this morning, they weren't running, they were retrieving. Brennan was at the door before she finished the sentence. But the window, the east-facing window, the one that looked out over the narrow service yard between the main hall and the old stone annex, chose that exact moment to illuminate with a sharp orange light that was not torchlight. It was the particular color of something on fire. Ramsay lifted his head from the crib, all 9 pups going alert in the same breath, and made a sound that Isolda had never heard from him before. Not distress, not hunger, not the ordinary language of newborns. Something older. A warning note that resonated at the same frequency as the golden light that had filled the room at their birth, but inverted. Danger, it said, in a language older than words. Now. Move. Xander was already at the window. The archive annex? He said. It's burning. The archive annex burned with the focused, deliberate energy of a fire that had been set by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Not a blaze, a surgical strike. The east wall only, precisely where the oldest records were stored, where 300 years of Ashvale land documentation lived in cedar drawers that were currently producing a column of smoke visible from every window on the castle's south side. Whoever had set it wanted specific things gone and was willing to lose the rest of the building to guarantee it. Xander was through the chamber door before Isolda had finished processing what she was seeing through the window. Stay, he started. Don't, she said. He turned, looked at her, looked at the 9 pups in the cedar crib, all of them awake now, all of them radiating that low golden warmth that pulsed in steady waves like a second heartbeat in the room. I'll stay with the pups, Bridgit said, already moving to the crib with the brisk certainty of someone who had pre-assigned herself this role approximately 40 minutes ago and was simply now executing it. Go. Both of you, if she insists, which she clearly does. Someone needs to make sure Brennan doesn't accidentally arrest everyone in the building while he's being thorough. She waved a hand. Also take Petra. She knows where everything is filed and Brennan does not. I resent that, Brennan said from the doorway. You filed a 17-point legal brief on horseback, Bridgit said. You are brilliant and you know nothing about archive geography. Both things are true. Go. They went. The service corridor that connected the main hall to the archive annex was 40 feet of narrow stone passage that smelled, on ordinary evenings, of old paper and cedar oil. Tonight it smelled of smoke and something chemical, not natural fire, not torch and timber combustion, but the sharper synthetic bite of an accelerant that had been applied with knowledge of what it was meant to destroy. Isolda knew that smell. She had encountered it once before, in the restricted archive during month 5 of her confinement, when she had found a drawer of documents that had been partially treated with it, not burned, just prepared, as though someone had begun the job and been interrupted. She had filed that observation away without knowing what to do with it. She knew now. He's been preparing the burn for months, she said, keeping pace with Xander through the smoke-thickened corridor. The accelerant was already on the documents. He was just waiting for the right moment to light it. Xander looked at her sideways. You found it? Month 5. I didn't know what it meant then. You should have... He stopped himself, exhaled. We'll discuss your habit of investigating things alone and not telling anyone when this is over. My habit of investigating things alone, she said, is what kept me alive for 9 months? He had no answer for that. She hadn't expected one. The annex door was hot but not yet impassable. Brennan hit it shoulder first without breaking stride, and it gave with the complaint of swollen wood. The fire hadn't reached the door itself yet, only the east wall. but the smoke was thick enough that Isolda felt it in her lungs immediately, sharp and insistent. "Third drawer from the left, second cabinet, east wall," Petra said from directly behind them, with the focused calm of a woman operating from muscle memory. "That's where the original fourth accord copy is filed." She paused. "Was filed? If the east wall is, it's still standing," Xander said, reading the room with the tactical speed of someone trained to assess spaces under pressure. The east wall was burning at the top, the cedar ceiling panels, the upper drawer rows, but the lower cabinets were intact. For now. The fire was moving downward with the specific patience of something that had time and intended to use it. They had perhaps 4 minutes. Brennan went left toward the water barrel mounted on the west wall, standard archive equipment, filled weekly, blessedly full tonight. Xander went directly for the east cabinet. Isolda went for the secondary files that Petra was already pointing to, the ones that held the council correspondence from the last 8 months, because if the original land grant was the sword, those letters were the hand that held it. The smoke was making her eyes water. She breathed through her sleeve and pulled the third drawer open and found it. Found all of it. A full accordion file of correspondence between Evander and 3 of the 5 elders going back 4 years, written in the careful, deniable language of men who were planning something and were smart enough to never write it plainly. Reading them later would be work. Having them was everything. She tucked them under her arm and turned. A figure stood in the doorway. Not Brennan, not Xander. Not anyone who had come with them. Aldrich Reese was 26 years old, Evander's nephew, and had the particular look of a young wolf who had been raised to understand that his family's interests and his personal conscience were the same thing and had never been given reason to question it. He was holding a torch. He was looking at the file under Isolda's arm with an expression that moved through surprise, calculation, and something that might have been, underneath everything else, shame. "Those need to burn," he said. His voice was not steady. "They need to be read," Isolda said. "There's a difference." "My uncle, your uncle," Xander said, from 6 feet to Aldrich's left, in a voice that arrived with the specific quality of a sound that fills a room completely and leaves no space for anything else. "Set fire to a 300-year-old archive to hide a land claim, and sent you to finish the job." He stepped forward, not threatening, not aggressive, simply present in the way that alpha wolves were present when they chose to let their full authority into a room. "Is that who you want to be?" Aldrich's torch hand dropped 2 inches. "He told me the documents were dangerous," Aldrich said, "that they would destabilize the pack, that the 9 marked pups were—" He stopped. "Were what?" Isolda asked. The young wolf looked at her, at her face, at the smoke-streaked certainty of a woman who had been accused, isolated, threatened, and was still standing in a burning room collecting evidence with a file under her arm. The torch dropped the rest of the way. Aldrich's boot came down on it. "He told me a lot of things," Aldrich said quietly. "He's been telling me things my entire life." A beat. "I'd like to hear the other side." Brennan arrived with the water barrel precisely then, moving at speed, and put out the east wall fire with the focused efficiency of a man who had been waiting for an opportunity to do something physically decisive after a day of legal documents. The hiss of water on burning wood filled the room. The smoke began to thin. In the sudden quiet, Petra crossed to the 3rd cabinet, 2nd drawer, opened it, and produced a sealed document tube of dark leather with the satisfied expression of a woman whose memory had not failed her. "Original copy," she said. "Intact." She held it up. "I oiled the leather monthly, just in case." A pause. "I've been oiling it monthly for 8 months. I did not know specifically what I was preparing for. I simply felt it was wise." Xander took the tube, looked at it. Looked at Petra with an expression of genuine, uncomplicated gratitude that sat differently on his face than the controlled authority he wore in the hall. "Thank you," he said. Simply. Entirely. Petra straightened her robes with the dignified composure of a woman receiving exactly the acknowledgement she deserved. "I've been the under-archivist of this pack for 31 years, she said. "No one has ever burned my archive before." A beat. "I find I have strong feelings about it. I'll have Evander explain himself to you personally," Xander said. Petra considered this. "I would like that very much." They returned to the Queen's chambers to find Bridgit seated beside the crib in the low candlelight. 9 pups arranged in the sleeping pile they had already developed a preference for, Ramsay at the outer edge, Lark at the center, the others distributed in a configuration that managed to look both completely accidental and somehow geometrically precise. And the room was glowing. Not the fierce gold of the birth hours, something quieter. A warmth that breathed in slow pulses from the center of the pup pile, moved outward through the air, and settled against the skin like the feeling of sunlight through a window in early spring. Present, deliberate, like something saying we are here and we know what we are. "They've been doing that for 20 minutes, Bridgit said without looking up from her knitting, which she had apparently produced from somewhere and begun at some point during the crisis, because Bridgit Ashvale did not waste time. "I believe it intensified when the fire started," she turned a row. "I believe they knew." Isolda crossed to the crib. Ramsay's eyes were open, Ramsay gray, already sharp, tracking her movement across the room with the focused attention of a creature that was 3 hours old and taking notes. She reached in. Ramsay pressed his nose to her palm, and the warmth spiked, gold, clear, singing at a frequency she felt in her back teeth. And then spread outward through the room in a single wave that passed through every wall and kept going. Down the corridor, through the stone, into the castle itself. Xander felt it. She saw it hit him. The sharp intake of breath, the hand going to his chest, the expression of a man whose wolf had just received information from a source it didn't have a category for. "What was that?" he said. "The founding gift," Isolda said. "All 9 of them together." She looked at him across the crib. "I think they just told the castle we're home." From somewhere in the east wing, distant, muffled, in the direction of the corridor that connected to Evander's private chambers, came the sound of a door opening very fast. Footsteps, running, not toward them, away. Brennan was already moving. Evander Reese had planned for many outcomes. He had planned for the king's return, for legal challenges, for the fire failing, for Aldrich losing his nerve. Aldrich had always been a contingency risk, too much of his mother in him, not enough of the family's long memory. He had planned for witnesses, for testimony, for the uncomfortable conversation with Xander that he had already scripted 3 versions of, each one calibrated to a different emotional temperature in the room. He had not planned for the golden wave. It had moved through the castle walls like a hand pressed flat against every surface simultaneously, warm, certain, carrying information that bypassed language entirely and landed somewhere older, somewhere the wolf lived before it had words. Every wolf in the building had felt it. He had felt it, standing in his private study with the secondary copies of his correspondence already in the fire, and his travel cloak already on his shoulders. And what he had felt was not the warmth. What he had felt was recognition. The old blood, responding to something older than itself, acknowledging what 9 founding pups meant the same way a compass needle acknowledged north. And then, underneath the recognition, the understanding of exactly what it meant for him. He was out of moves, not out of the castle, not yet. The north servant passage still existed. His horse was in the west stable, saddled since yesterday morning because Evander Reese had not survived 43 years in the politics of pack sovereignty by keeping his horse unsaddled. He moved through the passage with the focused economy of a man executing a plan he had hoped to never use and was now grateful to have. The passage was dark. He knew it by memory. 30 steps to the turn, 20 more to the stable access, 8 steps down and left to the door. He had walked it in his mind 100 times. He walked it now for the first. He made it 14 steps. Lord Reese. The voice came from ahead of him in the dark. Not behind, not above, not from any direction that made strategic sense. From ahead, which meant someone had known about this passage and had been here before him and was now standing between him and the stable door, with the particular patience of someone who had been waiting long enough to get comfortable. A torch came up. Commander Brennan looked at him across the flame with the expression of a large, methodical wolf who had done a great deal of paperwork today and was experiencing the particular satisfaction of watching it pay off. Passage 7, Brennan said, consulting nothing, because he had clearly memorized it. Runs from the east study to the west stable access. Built in year 12 of the Third Sovereignty, listed in the castle architectural records as a ventilation channel. He tilted his head. It is not a ventilation channel. I found that in the records this afternoon, just after I found the other passage, and the one before that. A beat. You built a lot of passages, my lord. I want to speak with the king, Evander said. His voice was steady. It was one of his better qualities, and he relied on it now. You're going to, Brennan said. But first you're going to come with me, because the king is currently with his wife and 9 newborn wolf pups, and I have been specifically instructed to handle the logistics of your situation, so he doesn't have to leave them. He produced a set of iron manacles from his belt with the matter-of-fact energy of someone who had brought them specifically because they planned to use them. Will you walk, or shall I carry this particular piece of logistics out with more enthusiasm than either of us wants? Evander looked at the manacles, looked at Brennan, calculated, quickly, thoroughly, arriving at the same answer from every angle. He walked. The great hall, cleared of its morning crowd, felt entirely different at midnight. Larger, quieter. The torches had burned low, and the stone held the cold of a castle in late autumn, and Evander stood at the center of the same floor where Isolda had stood that morning, with his wrists bound and the 5 elders ranged before the dais. Except now, it was not the elders on the dais. It was Xander, with Isolda beside him. With Aldrich Reese standing to the left, having spent the last 2 hours giving Brennan a full account of everything he had been told, instructed, and asked to do over the last 4 years in exchange for the king's consideration, which he had received, provisionally, because Xander was a wolf who understood the difference between the architect of a plan and the bricks used to build it. Evander looked at his nephew for a long moment. Something passed through his face, not anger, something more complicated and more final. You could have come to me, Evander said, quietly. I did come to you, Aldrich said, 3 years ago, when I asked you why the Luna's quarters had a lock on the outside. You told me it was protective. A pause. I believed you. I shouldn't have. Evander had no answer for that. Perhaps for the first time in a very long conversation he was having with himself. He had no answer. The Northern Corridor territories, Xander said. Not a question. He had the land grant document open on the stone table, the original. Petra's monthly oiled leather tube empty beside it. 200 years your family held that land. You grew up on it. My grandfather was born there, Evander said, and you believed that entitlement superseded a 3-century-old legal accord. I believed, Evander said, and for the first time all day his voice carried something that was not performance, something raw and old and tired, the voice of a man who had been holding a grievance so long it had become structural, that what was taken should be returned, that the accident of a legal condition should not erase what my family built there across generations. He looked at Xander directly. You have 9 pups who carry the founding gift. You understand now what that means. Your bloodline is sovereign for 300 years. My family's claim is gone. Permanently. He paused. I could not let that happen. So you tried to destroy her, Xander said. I tried to remove an obstacle, Evander said. And then, in the silence that followed, Something happened to his face that was neither composure nor calculation. Something that looked, unexpectedly, like a man hearing his own words from the outside for the first time. The silence stretched. "She is not an obstacle," he said finally. Not to the room, to himself. Quietly. With the specific weight of a realization arriving too late to change what it had already cost. Isolda looked at him across the hall. She had spent 8 months building a wall against whatever she felt about this man, brick by careful brick, and she did not dismantle it now. But she let herself see him clearly, not the villain she had needed him to be to survive, not a monster, but a man who had loved a piece of land so much he had hollowed himself out trying to keep it, and had not noticed, somewhere along the way, what he had become in the process. It did not excuse anything, but it was the truth, and she had always preferred truth to the shapes people built around it. "The council members who signed the declaration," Xander said, "will face a full review. Craveth will resign. The two who were coerced rather than complicit will be given the opportunity to demonstrate where their loyalty actually sits." He looked at Evander. "You will stand formal judgment. Before the full pack," Xander finished. "Not today, not tomorrow, when the council has been reconstituted and the proceedings are clean and every wolf in this territory can see that justice here means something." He held Evander's gaze. "That is what you will face. Not a rushed verdict in a hall still warm from what you built this morning. A real one." Evander was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. Once. With the particular gravity of a man who had spent decades outmaneuvering every room he stood in and had finally arrived in one he couldn't. "I would like to say one thing," Evander said. "Not in defense, simply as a fact." Xander waited. She never broke. Evander looked at Isolda, directly, without the performance of the morning, without the careful calibration of a man arranging impressions. Just looked at her. 8 months. Everything I arranged, every pressure I applied, every wolf I turned against her, she never broke. A pause. "I want that on the record. Whatever the judgment is, that should be on the record." The hall was completely still. Isolda felt the words land in a complicated place she didn't entirely have a name for. She did not thank him. She did not forgive him. Not tonight. Not yet. Perhaps not for a very long time. But she held his gaze and let him see that she had heard it, because she was not the kind of wolf who refused truth simply because of who was delivering it. Brennan, standing to the left with his document case, made a note. Audibly, with the specific energy of a man who had been waiting to write something satisfying all day. "On the record," Brennan confirmed. Noted. Evander was taken to the secure East Quarters, not a cell, not yet, but a room with a guard and no passage access, and a lock on the outside that Bridgit, appearing from nowhere at precisely the right moment, personally tested twice. "Seems secure," she said on the second test. "Though I will note that I find the irony of this particular lock arrangement deeply satisfying, and I will not be pretending otherwise." She tucked the key into her sleeve. "I'll keep this. I kept Isolda's for 8 months. It seems only appropriate." "Mother," Xander said. "I'm simply noting the symmetry," Bridgit said. "I'm allowed to note symmetry. It's practically an art form." The castle settled into its first honest quiet in 9 months. Not silence. Ashvale was never truly silent. Too much stone and too many wolves and too many things happening in the spaces between formal events. But the quality of the night had changed, the way air changes after a storm has moved through and left everything washed and real. Isolda felt it the moment she crossed back into the Queen's chambers and heard 9 small, sleeping bodies breathing in the particular synchronized rhythm they had already developed. All together, all steady. Ramsay slightly louder than the others, because Ramsay did everything at a slightly higher volume than strictly necessary. She stood in the doorway for a moment and just listened. Xander came up behind her. Not touching, just present, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him against her back, close enough to smell the road and the smoke, and underneath both of those the specific scent that her wolf had been carrying like a held note for 9 months. He looked over her shoulder at the crib. "They're all breathing," he said quietly, as though he needed to confirm it. "They're all breathing," she said, a beat of silence that had weight and texture and everything that needed to be said living inside it, waiting for the right shape. "I counted them," he said, "when I first walked in. In the hall, when I saw you. I counted 9. His voice was very low. I didn't know I was doing it until I reached 9 and something in my chest just... He stopped. "Just what?" "Stopped being afraid," he said. Simply. She turned. He was right there, closer than she'd registered, his eyes level with hers, carrying 9 months of distance and 6 days of riding, and 1 very long day of homecoming all at once in the particular way that exhausted people carried things they hadn't yet set down. She put her hand flat against his chest, felt his heart. Steady, present, real. "I named Ramsey," she said. "The others don't have names yet. I was waiting." Something shifted in his face. "Waiting for what?" "For you," she said. "Obviously." He covered her hand with his. The warmth between them was quiet and specific, and entirely theirs. And when he pressed his forehead to hers, the old gesture, the one that had been theirs since before everything, she closed her eyes and let the 9 months of held breath finally, fully go. The golden warmth from the crib pulsed once, softly, as though 9 small wolves had registered the moment and approved of it collectively. Ramsey made a small sound in his sleep. It sounded remarkably like, finally. "Did he just..." Xander started. "He does that," Isolda said. "He has opinions about everything. I told you." Xander laughed. Quiet, real, the first laugh she had heard from him since he walked through those doors, and it sounded like something coming back to life. He pulled her in with the careful deliberateness of a man very conscious of what she had been carrying, and she went, and the night settled around them like a thing that had been waiting to do exactly that. 3 days passed. They were not quiet days. Nothing about the aftermath of a 9-month Regency crisis was quiet, and Brennan's 17-point legal review expanded to 34 points by the second morning, which he announced with the specific pride of a wolf who had found his purpose. But they were good days, in the way that days become good when the worst thing has passed, and the real shape of life starts reassembling itself around the space the crisis left. Petra recatalogued the archive with 2 assistants and a running commentary on the state of the cedar drawers that Isolda heard from 3 corridors away and found inexplicably comforting. The 3 elders who had signed Evander's declaration under varying degrees of coercion presented themselves voluntarily to Brennan's review. 2 of them had genuine cases. One of them, Kravith, did not, and spent a long afternoon in a room with Brennan's documents and the expression of a wolf who had understood too late that ambition borrowed on someone else's plan came with a personal bill. Aldrich Reese asked, through Brennan, whether he might be permitted to meet the pups. Isolda said yes. He sat with the cedar crib for an hour and did not speak much, and when he left his eyes were red at the edges in the way of a young wolf recalibrating everything he had been taught about what his family was. Bridgit gave him soup on the way out. He accepted it without protest, which Bridgit said was the most promising sign she had seen from a Reese in 40 years. And the pups, the 9 of them, Ramsey and Lark and the 7 still waiting for names, grew. Not the way ordinary newborn wolves grew, slowly over weeks of careful tending. They grew the way the founding text described, in the particular accelerated rhythm of pups carrying the old blood at full convergence, each day bringing new awareness, new responsiveness, new evidence of the gift that moved through all 9 of them like a shared current. By the second day, Ramsey could track movement across the room with his eyes with the focused attention of someone taking inventory. By the third, Lark had learned to produce the golden warmth on purpose, a small, deliberate pulse of it, soft and precise, that she aimed at whoever in the room was carrying the most tension, like a small living heater with excellent emotional instincts. Bridgit was the first to notice. Bridgit stopped mid-sentence, her knitting needles going still, her expression doing something complicated. Did she just make me feel better on purpose? I think so, Isolda said. Bridgit looked at Lark for a long moment. Lark looked back with the calm, luminous attention of a newborn pup who knew exactly what she had done. Right, Bridgit said, resuming her knitting with the decisive energy of a woman updating her entire framework. That one is going to be either the greatest healer this pack has ever produced, or an extraordinary manipulator. A beat. Possibly both, sequentially. Those aren't mutually exclusive, Xander said from across the room. No, Bridgit agreed. In this family, they're practically a tradition. It was on the morning of the fourth day that the message arrived. Not through Brennan. Not through the formal channels that had been handling the reconstruction of the council and the preparation for Evander's formal judgment. Through the east gate, carried by a rider in no colors at all, a young wolf, travel-worn, who handed the sealed letter to the gate guard and was gone before anyone thought to ask his name. The letter was addressed to Isolda. Not the Queen, not the Luna, not any title, just her name. In handwriting she did not recognize. With a seal she had never seen, a circle within a circle, 9 points radiating outward, pressed in black wax. The same symbol as the founding gift. Exactly. But older. The lines thicker, the execution of someone who had been pressing that seal into wax for a very long time. She was alone when she opened it. Ramsay was asleep against her side, one small paw curled around her thumb in the habit he had developed on the second day, and showed no signs of abandoning. The room was quiet. The morning light came through the east window in the particular gold of early autumn. She read it once, read it again. Put it down on the coverlet with hands that were not quite steady. The letter contained 4 sentences. The 9 have woken the old seal. What sleeps beneath Ashvale wakes with them. You have 30 days before it surfaces. It will not wait for your pack to be ready. And beneath those 4 sentences, in smaller script, as though added as an afterthought by someone who wanted to be thorough. The last time it woke, it unmade 3 packs in a single night. The mother of 9 is the only one who can speak to it. We tried to tell the king. He was unavailable for 9 months. Ramsay opened his eyes, looked at the letter, looked at her, pushed his nose firmly against her thumb with the specific energy of a wolf saying, I know. I've been trying to tell you. Are you ready to listen now? Xander read the letter standing up. He always read difficult things standing up. Isolda had noticed this about him before everything, the way he received bad news on his feet as though sitting down for it would let it settle somewhere it shouldn't. He read it twice, set it on the desk, picked it up, and read it again. The seal, he said finally. The 9-pointed seal, you've seen it before. In the restricted archive, Isolda said. Month 3, in the oldest section, the texts that predate the 4th Accord. There was a whole chapter on it. She paused. I thought it was historical, a founding myth. Something the pack used to explain the first convergence. It's not a myth, said Petra. She was standing in the doorway, had been standing there for approximately 30 seconds, which Isolda was beginning to accept as simply how Petra operated. The under-archivist moved through the castle at her own schedule, arrived when information required her presence, and had apparently decided this morning qualified. May I? Petra crossed to the desk without waiting for the answer, which also felt entirely in character, and produced from her document bag a text that made the 4th Accord original look recent by comparison. The cover was dark leather, the spine repaired 3 times in different centuries, the pages inside the color of old honey. She opened it to a page marked with a strip of cloth and placed it beside the letter. The seal was there. Identical. Pressed into the page in the same black ink as the wax on the letter, surrounded by text in the oldest form of the pack's written language, the version that predated the common script, that only archivists trained in historical documentation could read fluently. Petra, it turned out, was fluent. The Ashfield territory, she said, tracing the text with one careful finger, was not always what it is. 300 years before the Fourth Accord, before the pack as it currently exists, this land held something the founding wolves called the Varic, a word that translates approximately as the deep current, a presence in the land itself. She looked up. Not a creature, not a spirit in the way the later texts describe spirits, something older, a form of the territory's own awareness, the land knowing itself, the way very old places develop a kind of memory. The land is alive, Isolda said slowly. The land was alive, Petra said, actively, consciously, in the way that young and powerful things are alive before they learn to sleep. She turned to the next marked page. The founding wolves couldn't commune with it. It was too old, too large, too different. The gap between its nature and theirs was too great. They couldn't speak its language. A pause. Until the first convergence, the first 9 marked pups, the first time the founding gift appeared in the bloodline. The golden warmth from the crib pulsed, steady, patient, as though it had been waiting for this conversation. The mother of the first 9, Petra continued, was the one who bridged it, not because she was the strongest wolf or the most powerful, because she was the one who had carried 9 lives that carried the land's own frequency. The gift isn't just a mark of bloodline strength, it's a tuning. 9 pups vibrating at the same frequency as the Varic, and their mother, who has held that frequency inside her body for 9 months, is the only wolf whose voice the Varic recognizes as its own. Brennan, who had arrived at some point during Petra's explanation and was taking notes with the focused intensity of a wolf who had found a new document category to be thorough about, raised a hand. What happens if it wakes without someone to speak to it? Petra turned to the 3rd marked page. The illustration there was not decorative. It was a map. 3 pack territories, carefully drawn, with their borders and landmarks and names. All 3 crossed out, in the same black ink as the seal, in a hand that was not calm. It doesn't destroy, Petra said carefully. That's not the right word for it. It reclaims. The way a river reclaims a floodplain that was built over. It returns the land to what it was before the pack settled it. Every structure, every boundary, every mark of habitation, she paused, simply ceases to be recognized by the land as real. The silence had a specific texture, the kind that follows information too large to process quickly. 30 days, Xander said. 27 now, Petra said. The convergence began at the birth. The letter was delayed by 3 days in transit. She looked at Isolda with the direct, uncomplicated gaze of a woman delivering facts and trusting the recipient to handle them. You are the only one who can speak to it. The text is very specific about this. The mother of the 9, during the convergence window, which closes at 30 days precisely, is the bridge. After that, the window closes. The Varic returns to sleep or it doesn't, depending on what it finds when it wakes. What does it need to find? Isolda asked. Petra looked at the text. Back at Isolda, at the crib where 9 small wolves slept in their synchronized pile, radiating steady gold warmth into the morning air. Acknowledgement, Petra said. The founding text uses the word recognition. It needs to be seen, by someone it can hear. A pause. And it needs to hear that the pack that lives on its land. She chose her next words with the care of someone quoting something important. Chooses to remain in partnership, not possession. Bridgit, from her chair in the corner, set down her knitting. That, she said, is either very simple or extremely complicated, depending on the state of the pack saying it. Given the state of this pack as of 4 days ago, Brennan said, not looking up from his notes, I would say both. The pack needs to be whole, Isolda said. Not a question. She was assembling it as she spoke, the pieces finding their arrangement. Not just legally, not just the council reconstituted and the crisis managed. Actually whole. The wolves who chanted in that hall, they need to understand what they were part of. Evander's judgment needs to happen first. The truth needs to be spoken publicly, in front of everyone. She looked at Xander. That's what the partnership means. A pack that knows its own history, that chose truth even when the lie was easier. Xander held her gaze across the room. You're saying the Varic will know the difference. It's been here longer than any of us, Isolda said. It will absolutely know the difference. Ramsay chose this moment to wake up, push himself upright with the wobbling determination of a 3-day-old wolf pup with significant ambitions, and produce a pulse of gold warmth that was notably larger than anything he had managed previously. It moved through the room, warm and certain and unmistakably deliberate, and where it passed over the old text on the desk, the pages rustled as though touched by a wind from somewhere underneath. Every wolf in the room felt it in their chest. Well, Bridgit said, into the ringing quiet. At least he agrees with the plan. She picked up her knitting. 27 days. We have a formal judgment to conduct, a pact to reunite, and apparently a very old piece of land to have a conversation with. She turned a row with brisk efficiency. I'll make more soup. These things always go better with adequate nutrition. This is not a soup situation, Mother, Xander said. Every situation, Bridgit said serenely, is a soup situation. You have simply not yet encountered enough situations to understand this. Brennan added something to his notes. When Isolda glanced over, the entry read, Soup. Strategic resource. Confirm quantities. She looked at it, looked at Brennan. Just being thorough, Brennan said. Outside, the autumn morning continued its ordinary gold business, unaware or unconcerned with what was waking underneath it. The castle went about its day. The territory breathed its slow territorial breath. And 27 days deep in the earth of Ashvale, something very old turned in its sleep and pressed upward, gently, like a question asked by something that had been waiting a very long time for someone who could hear it. Ramsay watched the floor with the focused, patient attention of a 3-day-old wolf who knew exactly what was down there and was entirely confident in his mother. He always had been. The judgment of Evander Reese happened on the 23rd day. Not because they had run out of time. 4 days remained in the convergence window. 4 days before the Varic either found what it was looking for or didn't. But because Brennan, after 23 days of the most thorough legal preparation Isolda had ever witnessed, looked up from his documentation on the morning of the 23rd day and said, with the calm certainty of a wolf who had counted everything twice, that they were ready, that every piece was in place, that waiting longer would be caution dressed as fear, and he had run out of patience for things dressed as other things. Xander had looked at Isolda across the breakfast table. She had looked back. Today, they had said simultaneously, and Bridgit had put down her soup spoon and said, finally, with the energy of a woman who had been ready for 2 weeks and had been very gracious about not mentioning it. The great hall filled differently the second time. The same 400 wolves, the same tiered galleries, the same torches burning too bright against the autumn morning. But the quality of the crowd was entirely different from the one that had chanted her name 3 weeks ago. These wolves came in quietly. They found their places without the electric anticipatory energy of a pack that had already decided its verdict. They sat with the particular subdued attention of people who had spent 3 weeks learning things about themselves they would have preferred not to know and were now present for the accounting of it. Isolda stood at the dais, not the center of the floor this time, not alone. At the dais, beside Xander, in the queen's position that had been hers since the binding ceremony, and had been systematically treated as provisional for 9 months, and was now simply, quietly, unambiguously hers. She had chosen a plain dress, dark green, no ceremony. Xander had raised an eyebrow when she came out of the dressing room, and she had said simply, "I don't need the silver anymore." And he had understood immediately, had crossed to her and straightened her collar with the careful deliberateness of someone performing a small act that meant something larger. And they had walked to the hall together without another word about it. Evander was brought in by Brennan and 2 guards. He walked without being pulled, which Isolda had expected. Whatever else he was, Evander Reese had always understood the importance of how a man entered a room. He looked older than he had 3 weeks ago. Not in the way of illness or defeat exactly, in the way of a man who had set down a very heavy thing he had been carrying for a very long time and was still adjusting to the absence of its weight. Brennan read the charges. All of them. It took 11 minutes, which was 3 minutes longer than Isolda had expected, and apparently exactly as long as Brennan had planned for, because he read at a pace that allowed every wolf in the gallery to follow every count without losing the thread. Conspiracy against the Luna. Falsification of pack records. Deliberate obstruction of royal authority. Destruction of archive materials. Coordination of an ambush against the king. This one landed differently than the others. A different quality of silence falling across the hall when Brennan read it. The sound of 400 wolves understanding for the first time the full shape of what had been built around them. When Brennan finished, Xander spoke. He did not speak as a king delivering a verdict. He spoke as the wolf who had ridden for 6 days because someone had tried to take what was his. Not the territory, not the title, but the woman who had stood in this hall alone and held her chin up and not broken. He named each act. He named each consequence. He named the wolves who had acted under coercion and the ones who had acted from choice, and he drew the line between them clearly, without cruelty, without performance, just the clean line of someone who believed that truth had a shape, and it was his responsibility to show it to the room. And then he did something that Isolda had not expected. He looked at the gallery, at the 400 wolves who had chanted 3 weeks ago, and he said, simply and directly, that they had been used, that the story they had been given had been designed specifically for them, calibrated to their grief over a missing king, to their fear of instability, to every wolf's oldest anxiety about lineage and belonging, and what happens when the bloodline doesn't hold. That being deceived by a man who had been planning for years was not the same as being guilty. But knowing is part of what we do now, Xander said. A pack that knows how it was manipulated is harder to manipulate again. That's not shame, that's armor. The gallery was very still. Then, from somewhere in the upper left tier, a wolf stood up. Middle-aged, unremarkable, the kind of face that didn't stand out in a crowd. He had been one of the loudest voices in the chant 3 weeks ago. Isolda recognized him because she had made herself look during those terrible minutes, because she had needed to know the specific faces of the wolves who were doing it. He stood up, and he said, in a voice rough with something that had clearly been building for 3 weeks, "I'm sorry, my queen." The silence lasted 3 seconds. Then 12 wolves stood, then 30. Then the gallery was a sea of rising bodies, not in unison, not choreographed, the ragged, genuine movement of individuals making a personal decision, one at a time, each one its own small act of accountability. Isolda felt it hit her somewhere she had been keeping carefully walled off for 23 days. She held herself together through sheer force of a habit she had built over 9 months, and she felt Xander's hand find hers under the edge of the dais table, and she held onto it. Evander received his judgment. Formal exile from Ashvale territory, permanent surrender of the Northern Corridor claim, 10 years of structured accountability to the packs whose stability his actions had threatened. Not a prison, not a death sentence. A consequence with a shape, one that required him to do something harder than suffer, which was to spend 10 years being useful to the people his ambition had harmed. He accepted it without a word. As he was led out, He passed close to the dais, close enough that Isolda could have reached out. She didn't. But she met his eyes, and he met hers, and something passed between them that was not forgiveness and was not its absence. Something more honest than either. An acknowledgement. Two wolves who had been on opposite sides of the same 9 months, both marked by it, both changed by it, both standing in the aftermath of what it had cost. He was gone before she found the word for what it was. Witness, she thought. We witnessed each other. That's all. That's enough. They went to the Varic at dusk. Isolda had known, without being told, that it would be at dusk. The texts were silent on timing, but something older than the text was not. The same instinct that had navigated 9 months of confinement and kept 9 lives breathing through all of it. Dusk. The hour when things that were one thing became another. When the land held both the day it was leaving and the night it was entering simultaneously. The place was not dramatic. She had expected something. A cave, a circle of stones, an ancient marker with the 9-pointed seal carved into it. What she found, at the edge of the northern forest where the Ashvale territory's oldest boundary ran along a ridge of dark rock, was simply a place where the ground felt different, warmer, aware. The way the wall had felt in the text she had read. The wall that opened for the first mother of 9, 300 years ago, because it had been waiting. Xander walked beside her. Brennan had offered to come. She had thanked him and said no. Bridgit had offered to come and Isolda had said yes, immediately, without deliberation, because some things you did not do without the person who had stood beside you through every version of impossible. Bridgit carried Lark. Xander carried Ramsay, who had been awake and alert since they left the castle with the focused attention of a wolf who had been anticipating this specific errand. The other 7 were distributed between them and 2 pack wolves, Aldrich among them, who had asked quietly and been given one of the calmer pups to carry and had held the small, warm weight with the reverence of someone being trusted with something they understood they had not yet earned but intended to. Isolda carried nothing. Her arms were free. Her hands were bare. She walked to the place where the ground was different, and she stopped and she put her palms flat against the earth, cold on the surface, warm beneath, the warmth deepening as her hands pressed down. And she didn't speak with words. She didn't have words for something this old. Instead, she opened the place in her chest where 9 months of carrying 9 lives lived, the exhaustion and the terror and the love that had grown so large it had required an entirely new architecture to hold it. And she let it flow through her hands onto the ground, just as all true things flow, without pretense, without asking for anything. "We are here," she said, in the language that was not language. "We know this land is not ours to possess. We know it was here before us and will be here after. We are asking to remain, not as owners, as wolves who understand the difference." The ground breathed. She felt it. A long, slow exhalation from somewhere deep and enormous. The movement of something that had been holding tension for 300 years, releasing it all at once. The way a body releases a breath it forgot it was holding. The golden warmth from the 9 pups spiked, all of them together, Ramsay and Lark and everyone between. A burst of light that moved outward from the ridge in a wave that Isolda felt move through the soles of her feet, and up through her spine and out through the top of her head like being played like an instrument. The Varic answered, not in words, not in images, in feeling. Ancient, enormous, and underneath all that enormity, unexpectedly, something that felt almost like relief. The feeling of something that had been alone for a very long time and had just been found by someone who could hear it. Recognized, it said, in the language beneath language. Partnership acknowledged. The 9-marked convergence is witnessed. The land holds. The light peaked, brilliant gold pouring from the ridge outward in every direction, visible from every wall of the Ashvale castle, visible from the northern border where the Greyvale wolves were camped, visible from the village at the territory's southern edge, where ordinary wolves were sitting down to ordinary suppers and looked up from their tables at a sky that had briefly become something else entirely. Then it settled. Slowly, like sunrise in reverse, not disappearing, just quieting, drawing down into the ground where it had always lived, where it would live now in the particular steady warmth of something that had been acknowledged and had answered and was, at last, at rest. Isolda lifted her hands from the earth. Ramsay, in Xander's arms, let out a long breath that sounded remarkably like satisfaction. "Done?" Xander asked quietly. "Done," she said. He shifted Ramsay to one arm and put the other around her, and she leaned into him, not dramatically, just entirely, and let the weight of 27 days and 9 months before that, and all the months before that, sit somewhere outside her body for the first time. Bridgit looked at the sky where the light had been, at the dark that was now soft and warm in a way it had not been this morning. At 9 small wolves settling into quiet in the arms of the wolves who carried them, the golden warmth of them no longer urgent, but simply present, constant, low, steady as a heartbeat. "Well," Bridgit said, after a long moment. She reached into her sleeve and produced, with the absolute serenity of a woman who had planned for this specific outcome, a small wrapped sweet. She held it out to Isolda. "Fennel and honey," she said. "You always forget to eat when something significant happens." A pause. "And I believe this qualifies." Isolda took it, ate it, tasted it properly for the first time. It was, she had to admit, exactly what she needed. 6 months after the night the sky turned gold, the great hall of Ashvale was full again. Not with the pressed electric tension of a crowd that had been arranged into a verdict. Not with 400 wolves finding a single pulse for someone else's purposes. Full the way halls fill when something worth celebrating has arrived, and the pack has decided collectively and without instruction that it intends to be present for it. The 9-month naming ceremony for the first convergence pups of the Ashvale bloodline in 300 years was not, technically, a mandatory attendance event. Every wolf in the territory came anyway. Isolda stood at the dais, the queen's position, her position, unremarkable now in the way that things become unremarkable when they have finally settled into their correct shape, and watched the hall fill from the doors inward with the specific warmth of someone who had stood in this same room at the lowest point of her life and was now standing in it at something that felt, quietly and completely, like its opposite. She wore deep green, no silver. She had not worn silver since the day she had told Xander she didn't need it anymore. And she had been right. And she intended to keep being right about that for the rest of her life. Xander stood beside her. He had not been more than a room away from her in 6 months except when duty required it, and sometimes not even then. And she had stopped finding this remarkable and started finding it simply true. The way the ground was true. Present, constant, load-bearing. Between them, in the ceremonial naming cradle that Petra had located in the archive's lower storage and restored with the focused dedication of a woman who considered every historical object a personal responsibility, 9 wolf pups of 6 months occupied themselves with varying degrees of patience for formal proceedings. Ramsay had none. He sat at the cradle's edge with his small gray-black paws on the rail and watched the arriving crowd with the comprehensive attention of a wolf conducting an assessment and reaching conclusions. He had been doing this since approximately week 2 of his life and showed no signs of stopping. Lark sat at the center of the group in the particular stillness she had always preferred. Not passive, never passive, but present in the deep, radiating way of something that warmed whatever it was near. 3 wolves in the front row had stopped fidgeting within 30 seconds of sitting within Lark's range. None of them appeared to know why. Bridgit, seated to the left of the dais and fully aware of why, looked extremely satisfied about it. The remaining 7 had developed, over 6 months, into a collection of personalities so distinct that Isolda sometimes looked at them all together, and marveled at how 9 lives from the same source could arrive at such different expressions of themselves. There was Ember, the one Bridgit had predicted would argue about furniture, who had already displayed a strong commitment to reorganizing any space she occupied according to principles no one else fully understood. River, the quietest of the 9 after Lark, who tracked sound with his ears with the focused precision of someone composing something in his head. Talon, who had inherited some concentrated version of Ramsay's impatience, and expressed it through a continuous low-grade commentary of sounds that Bridgit had described as opinions delivered at volume. The twins, identical in coloring and completely different in temperament, Ash, deliberate and watchful, and Cinder, who approached every new situation with the open enthusiasm of someone who had never once encountered a consequence they couldn't survive. And the last 2, Slate and Pippa, who had from the very beginning operated as a unit, sleeping pressed together, waking together, responding to things simultaneously in the way of 2 wolves who had worked out a private language before they had any other kind. 9 names. 6 months in the making, each one found rather than chosen, each one arrived at through the specific process of watching a small wolf become themselves and waiting for the word that fit. Isolda had written them all down in the pack archive the morning after the Varic answered. In the oldest register, the one Petra had shown her, the one that held the names of every convergence generation in the bloodline's recorded history. 300 years of blank pages, waiting. She had filled the first 9 lines herself, in her own hand, because some things you did not delegate. The ceremony was conducted by Petra. This had not been the original plan. Tradition held that the senior elder performed the naming rite, but the senior elder position was currently occupied by a reconstituted council whose newest member was 17 days into the role, and Xander had looked at the options, and then looked at Petra and said simply, "You've been here longer than any of them, and you know every word of the rite from memory." Petra had accepted with the composure of a woman receiving an outcome she had considered possible and had been too professional to anticipate openly. She conducted it flawlessly. Of course she did. When she spoke each name into the hall, Ramsay, Lark, Ember, River, Talon, Ash, Cinder, Slate, Pippa. The golden warmth pulsed with each one, soft and distinct, as though each pup recognized the sound of themselves being made official and approved of it. The hall felt it every time. 400 wolves, breathing the same warm air, receiving 9 names like 9 small lights being lit in sequence. By the 9th name, the hall was completely silent in the way that only happens when something is so present that noise would be a reduction of it. Then Ramsay, who had been maintaining his vigil at the cradle rail throughout the ceremony with admirable focus, chose the exact moment of final silence to produce a sound that was emphatically not solemn. A short, sharp, declarative bark that rang off the stone ceiling and sent a ripple of startled laughter through the front 3 rows. "That," Bridgit said, at normal conversational volume, into the laughter, "is Ramsay indicating that the formal portion is over and refreshments should be forthcoming." She looked at her grandson with the expression of a wolf who had been studying him for 6 months and had reached accurate conclusions. "He's been thinking about the food since we entered the hall. I could tell by the way he was watching the kitchen entrance." "He's 6 months old," Xander said. "He is 6 months old with priorities," Bridgit said. "I respect that in a wolf." The feast that followed lasted until the autumn stars were fully out. Isolda moved through it the way she had learned to move through crowded rooms in the last 6 months. Not performing, not managing, just present, genuinely present, in the way that becomes possible when you are no longer spending half your energy on armor. Wolves came to her. They brought gifts for the pups, brought words they had been carrying for 6 months, brought the particular offering of people who had done something they regretted and had spent the intervening time trying to become someone who wouldn't do it again. The wolf from the gallery, the first one who had stood, the one who had said, "I'm sorry," my queen in a rough and genuine voice, brought a carved wooden toy that he had made himself, he explained, over the course of 4 months, because he hadn't known what else to do with the feeling and his hands needed something to work on. It was a small wolf, 9-pointed star worked into the base. Ramsay claimed it within 30 seconds of it being placed in the cradle and showed no interest in sharing it. Aldrich Reese came midway through the evening. He had spent 6 months in the territory on the terms Xander had offered, not forgiven, not condemned, but given the space to demonstrate who he was when the architecture of his uncle's influence was no longer the only structure he knew. He had been working with Brennan on the council reconstruction. He had been learning, according to Brennan's notes, with the focused determination of someone who understood that he was building something he should have been building all along. He stood before Isolda with the directness of someone who had practiced this moment and then decided to abandon the practice and simply mean it. "I carried Cinder at the Ridge," he said, "on the night of the Varic. You trusted me with that." A pause. "I haven't forgotten it." "I know," Isolda said. "That's why I did it." He nodded. Something settled in him, visible even from the outside, a weight shifting into a more sustainable position. He went to find Brennan, and Isolda watched him go, and thought about the particular architecture of trust, how it was built the same way everything real was built, slowly, with specific materials, by someone who showed up consistently and let time do the rest. Kraveth had resigned. He was somewhere in the southern territories, she had heard, not exiled, simply gone, in the way of a wolf who understands that the place he occupied no longer fits the shape he has become. She wished him nothing dramatic, just the ordinary work of becoming someone better. That was hard enough. Evander's exile had begun. Reports came through the formal channels, structured, documented, Brennan approved, of a man fulfilling the terms of his accountability with the same thoroughness he had once applied to everything else. She had not expected to find anything in that to feel. She had found something quiet and complicated that she had decided to call hope, not for herself, but for him. It seemed like the most honest thing she could offer across the distance. Late in the evening, when the hall had thinned to the comfortable remainder of a celebration finding its natural end, Isolda slipped out to the east corridor. Not fleeing, just needing a moment of quiet in the way that people who have been in rooms all day sometimes need the absence of rooms. The east corridor was empty and cool and smelled of old stone, and the particular combination of pine and something warm and living that had been present in the castle air since the night the sky turned gold. The Varic's acknowledgement had changed something in the walls themselves. Subtle, not dramatic, but present in the way that things are present when something very old has been respected and has responded to being respected. The castle felt inhabited differently now, more like a living thing that had agreed to house them, and less like a structure they occupied. She stood in the corridor for a moment and just breathed. Footsteps behind her. She knew them before she turned, had known the specific weight and rhythm of them for long enough that they registered somewhere below thought. Xander handed her a cup of warm tea, fennel and honey, Bridget's recipe, which had somehow become the household standard over 6 months of consistent production, and stood beside her in the comfortable silence of two wolves who had run out of distance between them and were satisfied with the fact. "Ramsay has the carved wolf," he said. "He's had it since approximately 30 seconds after it arrived. Cinder tried to take it twice. She always tries. He always keeps it." Isolda wrapped both hands around the cup. "They've worked that out." A beat of quiet that held everything good and a little tired and very full. "I stood in this corridor," she said, "on the morning of the judgment, the first one, alone." She looked at the stone. "I remember thinking that the walls knew something I didn't, that the castle was waiting for something." She paused. "I think it was waiting for what it already had. It just needed someone to say so." Xander was quiet for a moment. "That's what you did, at the Ridge." "That's what we did," she said. "All of us. The pack choosing truth in the hall, Aldrich carrying Cinder, Petra oiling the leather for 8 months just in case." She looked at him. It wasn't just me speaking to the Varic. I was the voice. But the words belonged to all of us. He held her gaze in the low light of the corridor, and she saw in it everything the 9 months had cost him, and everything the 6 months since had rebuilt. And she thought, not for the first time, and not for the last, that the most extraordinary thing about love was not that it survived difficulty, but that it came out of difficulty with new rooms in it, rooms that could only have been built by the specific pressure of that specific darkness, rooms that were now simply part of the house. 9 names, he said softly. 9 names, she agreed. The golden warmth moved through the corridor from the direction of the hall, distant, steady, 9 small fires burning in their synchronized rhythm. Ramsay and Lark and all the ones between, alive and named and home. Isolda drank her tea. The castle breathed around her. The land beneath it kept its long, warm, acknowledged peace. And the walls, the old stone walls that had been standing long before any of them and would stand long after, held every version of what had happened here. The chanting and the silence and the fire and the judgment and the ridge at dusk and the name of every wolf who had stood up in a gallery when it cost them something. All of it. Kept. Real. To everyone listening, if Isolda's story moved you, if you felt the weight of what she carried and the warmth of what she built, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments which moment stayed with you. Was it the hall, when she held her chin up alone? The ridge, when she spoke to something older than words? Or maybe it was Ramsay who always knew right from the beginning. If you believe in stories about wolves who carry impossible things and refuse to put them down, subscribe, turn on notifications, and come back. There are more. I'll be here.